Good afternoon, it's Friday the 14th of September. Welcome to UK Column Live. Brian Gerrish in the studio together with Mike Robinson, and I'm very pleased to say it's a lovely sunny day here in Plymouth, England, and we're going to bring you a bit more of the news. We're going to try and tell you what's really happening instead of what's being transmitted by the mainstream media. So of course at the moment very turbulent things going on, not only in UK but worldwide. And we're going to kick off talking about Hillsborough, obviously a very, very serious subject, but a lot more behind the scenes to that one. We're going to have a look at what's happening in the financial world. We've got some comment on the present unrest amongst the Muslim community as a result of the so-called US film. And we're also going to be talking a little bit about what's happening with the troops in Afghanistan. So, Mike, Hillsborough obviously really hitting the press, and it's very good to see that finally truth is starting to emerge. Of course, many people have been shocked by the fact that they can now see irrefutable evidence that the police have lied and falsified statements. Many other people across the country, of course, won't be surprised. But there's more going on behind the scenes. What do you think about this one at the moment?
Well, we talked about it yesterday, so really it's your comment on this today, I think.
Well, the key bit that I see is that, of course, it's excellent that we're now seeing the factual evidence of the lies and the falsification of documents by police. But I can't help but think that actually there's another agenda here, which is the fact that we're now starting to see the police, the overall reputation of the police is being completely rubbished. And I think that this is part of the wider agenda at the moment to actually destabilise society, so that we've now got a situation where people in Britain are unsure as to whether they can trust the police. And this is going to make life very, very difficult as we start to see the government whip up further trouble and unrest on the streets. So whilst, of course, we're absolutely supportive of the tremendous efforts by the Hillsborough family to get the truth out, and UK Column would certainly like to see prosecutions of police who have bent evidence, we also need to be aware of the fact that this reflects on a few policemen within the police force in Yorkshire, but also across the country. And we've got to remember those good men and women who are still honest and trustworthy and serving the public in other places. So we don't want to be led down the path that people think simply as a result of Hillsborough we can no longer trust anybody who's wearing a police uniform, because that's absolutely incorrect. And the other thing that I think I'd like to actually sort of highlight is the fact that basically we're not seeing at the moment any talk about prosecutions of politicians, and it's an absolute fact that whilst the police may have to take the blunt end of investigations and prosecution, we have seen the major political parties absolutely conspiring to keep the Hillsborough disaster buried. And we would say that we also need to see prosecutions of politicians who have consistently helped to cover up what has actually happened. Yeah. We've just got one slide here of the obviously of the victims, which we'll just put up very quickly. And an initial a shot of some of the initial sad events on those days. But of course, behind the scenes, we're now seeing some very interesting things happening with how the whole case is being framed and put together. The Mail is just one of the papers that's calling out now for criminal charges to be brought against senior officers. But as I've just said, we're not at the moment seeing any forceful calls for ministers, whether it's in the Labour government or the Tory government, to be brought into the frame. And I also think it's very significant that we've got this gentleman who's now come into the frame, Lord Falkoner, because he's been advising families on their case in the background, I would simply ask a question: is this man too close to people at the top of the former Labour governments and indeed the present Conservative government? Is this man too close to the politicians to actually be fair, unbiased and objective in any help he's giving the family? Is it possible that this man has actually been brought in to, how would you describe it, manage
the opposition? Yeah.
So we wait and see how this unfolds. But of course, what we now understand in Britain is, if we can see this irrefutable evidence that senior police officers are prepared to falsify police statements, witness statements and documents in the Hillsborough disaster, then we can certainly be sure that policemen are prepared to manipulate and falsify evidence in other cases, whether they were to be very serious events such as Dunblane, for example, but also if they were to be cases where the state is taking children, where we're consistently seeing that families are reporting that documents are being falsified, whether it's by so-called psychiatric experts or whether it's as a result of police giving testimony in court. And I'll just add there that over the last 2 days in Skegness, of course totally unreported by mainstream press, there's been a conference talking about children being deliberately stolen by the state and social services. Many of the victim families who spoke out at that conference are of course talking about the utter lies and fabrication of evidence being carried out by civil servants. So perhaps Hillsborough is going to help take the lid off something, but my prediction is we are going to be seeing very, very amazing events about just how deep the rot goes, not only into the police but into the higher echelons of the civil service and government.
Yeah.
So financial matters is always close to your heart.
Yes, I mean, really we are looking at this financial Armageddon now. Yesterday, Ben Bernanke announced QE3, quantitative easing 3, so $1.5 trillion of bond buying by the Federal Reserve Bank. This can only have one outcome, and that outcome is this. Quantitative easing produces hyperinflation at the end of the day. Well, they are expanding a bubble. The bubble has existed for many, many years, it made one serious attempt at bursting in 2007, 2008. They managed to patch that hole over, but the tension on the surface of that bubble is now getting to the point of beyond bursting point, really. So we are looking directly at a hyperinflationary policy, both as we mentioned yesterday, as a result of the Constitutional Court decision in Germany and the ratification of the ESM and the European Central Bank, their new mechanisms for printing money, and now Ben Bernanke coming out and printing more money in the States. It's pretty unbelievable what they're doing, but what isn't unbelievable is the response in the stock markets, because stock markets globally are flying through the roof yet again. And you ask the question, why? Is it a reflection of what's really going on in the economy? Well, of course not. What's actually going on is that the stock markets are delighted that the financial system is going to continue to be bailed out for another period of time. When's the bubble going to burst? Who can say? We've learned that lesson in the past. It's impossible to make a judgment on timings of these things. But what we can say is that every time the financial establishment puts this kind of pressure, makes this kind of move, it's simply putting more and more pressure on the system. And when it goes, it's going to be a bigger bang. Yeah,
and we just reinforce the point that many people still watch what's happening with the so-called quantitative easing to think that this is sensible bankers and governments who are trying to rectify the financial system, when in actual fact what we are seeing is the deliberate collapse of the financial institutions in order to put pressure on countries and populations. If we're all destitute, we can be much more easily controlled. For those of you that wonder about the picture that we're showing on screen, this was the header for an original UK column article about quantitative easing, which I think we published about 4 years ago.
About that, yes. And it's a representation of a very famous photograph from Weimar, Germany, I believe. Just what you said there, of course, there is a political agenda to push through this fiscal and political union in Europe, and that's why they're pushing this. But of course, within the City of London and the other financial centres around the world, there's much faction fighting going on. There are some people within those establishments that absolutely want to try to save the financial system if they can, and some other players that are playing a very dangerous political game. So yes, you're absolutely agree with you that it is an intentional collapse of the financial system. These guys know exactly what they're doing, but there's definitely a lot of infighting within the city. Yes.
Yeah, and of course it's the bankers pulling the strings of the politicians. Anybody who believes at the moment in Britain that David Cameron is running the country, I think the UK column would say, I'm sorry, but you're wrong. The people running the country at the moment are the international bankers, and Cameron and the rest of the party leaders are the puppets. So we need to get deeper into the subject, as we will in due course.
Well, just before you move on, of course, we've got to remember that quantitative easing is about buying back government bonds and printing money in order to do that. This mechanism is based on the whole premise that nations borrow money from private investors in the first place at interest. I'll just make a plug for the greenback pound at this point, and the idea of having national credit in order to pay for.
We issue our own money.
We issue our own money.
Or the government issues
interest free. Yes.
Yeah. So that's worthy of a whole documentary programme in due course. But of course, if we talk finances, then really we've got to be talking jobs, and we picked up here from a report in the Express, which has got Vincent Cable, of course, who's constantly put forward as an upstanding member of the Lib Dem parties that knows about business and knows what should be done. And this is, I think, one of those disingenuous articles where the headline leads you to believe that fire at will plans have been dropped. This is where proposals have been put forward by the government to actually say that it should be easier for companies to fire people who they say are underperforming. And this article is actually saying, well, no, that's not quite going to happen. They're going to abandon some of those. But if you actually read through the article and look through the smoke screen, what you can actually see, this, I'm going to use the word corrupt because I can't think of a better word, this corrupt conservative Lib Dem coalition, what they are actually doing piece by piece is putting power into the hands of the corporations. We're bringing those corporations into the decision-making process in government, and then we're giving the corporations the ability to fire people at the drop of a hat. So for all the talk about the Lib Dems being a socialist party, or at least socially aware and concerned for people, what we actually see out of this coalition is the drive to make the ordinary person simply a resource for the corporate companies.
Well, the excuse that's being used here is that small business cannot afford to take to experience the tribunal system. If they need to get rid of somebody and somebody decides to take them to a tribunal, that's very expensive for small business, and it's all being pushed. The whole fire at will thing is being pushed as being something for small business, but of course it's not really, is it? It's for big business, and to allow big business to fire people as they see fit without having to make any significant payout at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay, well, do have a look at that article yourselves, because it's quite interesting, and of course it also highlights the ridiculous nature that we've got this constant squabble within the coalition. Who is really governing the country at the moment? Is it David Cameron, or is it Nick Clegg? Well, it's the bankers. Okay. Well, is this light-hearted stuff, or is this something more serious? Because the subject of Kate Middleton uncovering herself is now hitting the headlines. Of course, the palace at the moment are screaming that this is an absolute invasion of privacy. It just surprises me that a new member of the royal elite should be silly enough to allow herself to be photographed in this
hold on.
But you may not agree.
No, I do not agree. I actually think this is a genuine invasion of privacy. This is somebody hiding in the bushes with a long lens, taking photographs from inside a hotel room. Right. So what goes on inside the hotel room? We've had this conversation before. When you're in the public eye, you know, your reputation should be squeaky clean. There should be no opportunity for blackmail and so on. But in this case, I think this was absolutely not in the public interest. It was not. It was an invasion of privacy, and I think this is a false flag operation. This is absolutely being set up. She is being used. This has been set up. This magazine has taken an editorial decision to print these pictures, which are clearly an invasion of privacy. Why have they taken this editorial decision? Why have they paid the money for the pictures? Who's behind the decision to do that? These are the questions that we need to get to. And I see this as
the objective of this is to
just as with Hillsborough, people are being set against the police. This is to set people against the media. This is because this is preparation for Leveson, in my opinion. Leveson's going to come back with a report on privacy of and the right of privacy what's the word? Celebrities and people of status. This is preparation for Leveson. They're softening us up.
We're going to mention, if we've got time, we are going to get on to Leveson. We probably should have put these two articles together, but this is really what we've just done. Live on camera is to have the debate where the moment you start asking the right questions about what you read in the press, what are they really trying to tell you, it's very interesting what you can start to see when you ask a bit deeper.
Yeah.
So we're going to stick up for Kate on this issue occasion. At the moment, and we're also going to stick up for the mainstream press, because we're getting reports now that mainstream journalists and media people are finally beginning to ask the right questions about the moves for the state to control free press.
Yeah.
Well, this is definitely your man, not as attractive in my opinion.
Right. Well, Clash of Civilisations. We're seeing this situation with this film that was made in the United States being ramped up to the point that the news was reporting this morning that, or last night or this morning, that 1 million people are expected to be out protesting in Egypt, for example.
Right. So this is the film, but the American.
This is the film, and what I just wanted to highlight was in 2010, in August. It's on the website. We produced an article I wrote the article called "Who is the Enemy?" and it was about this man, Bernard Lewis, and the whole Clash of Civilisations policy. I just want to mention a couple of things out of this article.
Yeah.
First of all, this man is British. This is a British foreign policy, this Clash of Civilisations policy, and it's based on the idea that in a modern society, we don't have wars between countries with borders and nation states. We have wars between religions or creeds or skin colour and this kind of thing. So it is absolute divide and conquer policy. This man, along with Zbigniew Brzezinski in the States, was responsible for example, the policy which resulted in the first Afghanistan war with Russia, when Russia invaded Afghanistan. And basically, this man with Brzezinski was financing the Mujahideen, which eventually turned into Al-Qaeda, and as we know, that at least that group of organizations which are tentatively called Al-Qaeda. And we're seeing the same kind of operation going on in the Middle East at the moment. It's extremely dangerous because young British Muslims are going over to the Middle East. They're getting training. They're taking part in the activities over there. They're being drawn into and they're being radicalized. At the same time, we see the same kind of operation going on with Christians around the world, and you know, this film that's come out is as a result of that. Yeah. And we're seeing the same kind of movement towards the right-wing agenda happening in Europe and in Britain as well. So the intention is going to be to absolutely push these two communities together in civil, well, in warfare, in conflict. And so the news stories that we're going to come on to are key parts of that. So that's the Telegraph's article on this, and they're showing that more attacks on U.S. embassies in the Middle East. Yeah. So this is very, very strategic manipulation of individuals and societies in order to bring them into conflict with each other. Yes, yeah. Absolute divide and conquer, order out of chaos kind of policy.
And what we know for a fact in the UK at the moment is that if we talk to senior members of the Muslim community, they know and also understand what we're talking about today. But they're also slightly fraught, or more than slightly fraught, in that those senior Muslim leaders are also trying to educate their own society to understand that effectively they are being used and manipulated. And something which we would like to put across most strongly for the UK column is that at the moment it's the people at the top of the tree who are manipulating. They want violence on the streets. My personal opinion is that our own government is helping to foment the tension and the angst and the violence. That's what they're trying to foment, is violence on the streets of UK, because if we're all at each other's throats, they can simply implement whatever policies they like. Yeah. So if you're coming up against groups who are advocating violence, they must be working for the other side, or they're people who've been lured into the trap of thinking that, you know, this hostility is real. We're being manipulated.
Well, look, you know, this is another example of it. But the key thing is that one of the messages that we've been giving for as long as we've been running these live broadcasts is that Britain is under attack as a nation state. All the nation states of Europe are under attack to be replaced with a pan-national organisation in the case of Europe. As Patrick Henningsen was saying on UK Column Live yesterday, all the stuff that we're seeing in the Middle East is a direct attack on the nation states of the Middle East. The intention again is to destroy nation states, balkanise them. Yeah. I strongly recommend that I've put the archive of yesterday's interview with Patrick on the UK Column website. I strongly recommend that everybody watches that. It's extremely important what he's saying.
Okay, well, it really in a way follows on the theme here, because we switch across to the subject of UK troops in Afghanistan, and the Mail here has been reporting the words of Philip Hammond, Defence Secretary. More UK troops could come home from Afghanistan next year, as Philip Hammond reveals surprise at the pace of the withdrawal. Now that is a headline which of course requires questioning straight away, because why should the Defence Secretary be surprised at policy which presumably he has helped put into place in the first place? So what we've really got here is another article. If we accept that the Mail is printed with no bias, they've simply reported information that's been given to them, we can still look at this article and say, what is actually being said here? Are we really saying that the Defence Secretary and his team are so incompetent that they're not sure what the pace of withdrawal is? They're talking about actively considering speeding up the timetable, actively considering. So what does that mean? We're being told now that Afghan forces are taking the lion's share of the combat role, but that's definitely not what's being reported back into the UK column. And then we're talking about 500 British troops returning. Of course, the more troops that are pulled out of the country, the more difficult it remains for those left behind to actually work the front. But in any case, we've got 9,000 troops left in Afghanistan. Meanwhile, at home, the British Army is being cut and cut and cut. And those cuts are without doubt in order to force the British military into ever closer integration with particularly the French, but essentially with the European forces, because we are to be stripped of the ability to defend ourselves as a nation state. This man, Philip Hammond, I'm sorry, I'm blocking part of his image, there we are. But what is this man really up to? It's the usual trick of he's telling us one thing and doing something else. But his comments that he's made recently are that he's concerned that the rioting which led to the murder of the US ambassador in Libya could spread to Afghanistan, and measures have been taken to beef up security around British bases. Well, how does that actually fit with the fact that we're now going to cut the forces? So, and also, what has Mr. Hammond done to investigate the source of the film which is actually whipping up the violence? Is the British government, are British security services now looking into this, or are we simply part of the play of whipping up the hatred? He also says that Britain would not be spooked by the spate of green on blue attacks where Afghan troops have killed their British colleagues. Of course, Mr. Hammond won't be bothered about being spooked because he won't be in the firing line with the danger of being shot. So this again is another spineless British politician who won't tell the truth about what's really being played out in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is to keep the British public under the illusion that we're constantly at war, and he echoes this in his final comments. Britons would have to get used to the idea that any peace in Afghanistan will need to involve reaching out Northern Ireland style to at least a moderate part of the insurgency.
I find that last comment extremely interesting, because on Monday we were told we were just going to have to get used to the idea of changing job markets. We're just going to have to get used to the idea of European regulation of British banks and the British financial system and a pan-European system. Now we just have to get used to the idea. We don't have to get used to these ideas. These people are telling us that we have to, but you know, who made them the boss?
Well, if we're going to be positive on a Friday, just perhaps Hillsborough is the start of actually politicians having to get used to the fact that when people really start to work together to get the truth out, that the politicians have to bend to ordinary good people. Yeah. But I'd just like to bring this man onto the screen because, of course, we've now got David Laws MP, the man who had to leave his job due to fiddling. Most British public would call this criminal activity. He's now been brought back in to look after families, but also to make judgments on Britain's Trident nuclear deterrent. And I find this picture absolutely appalling, because this man, in my view, is utterly betraying the lady in the picture and people of her age who have suffered, and I've no doubt lost relatives, people trying to defend this country. So the hypocrisy of these people is absolutely unbelievable. Yeah. We've got a minute and a bit to go. A few words on the Lib Dems. Recent conference, by the Lib Dems, they were talking about the secret courts. Now, of course, that was all part of Ken Clarke's legacy. It's certainly not gone away. We're seeing the British government working desperately to introduce courts without juries, because these are the courts that can make the secret decisions. And we're also saying that the government should be able to simply say whether or not a matter can be brought into an open public court. So there's some squabbling going on here. And of course, the man who's doing the dirty work is the unelected Deputy Prime Minister of Britain, Clegg. He's in the background absolutely pushing for these changes to stay. Meanwhile, the rank and file of the Lib Dems, I think, are slowly beginning to realise that they've been utterly betrayed by this pro-European and supranational state supporter guru. So, very devious man. And Final few comments for phone hacking. The Guardian reporting, of course, that Hugh Grant and others are filing High Court claims over phone hacking. Of course, we should remember Hugh Grant's track record and what he's been up to and why he's been in the press. Mucky stuff. But the key point is he has been working in the background with the Hacked Off campaign and the Media Standards Trust, who are the very organisation who've been assisting the Leveson inquiry through the likes of Common Purpose Chair of Trustees Sir David Bell.
Who's third from the left there.
Who's third from the left, standing next to Shami Chakrabarti, of course the lady who was happy to be involved with an organisation taking money from the Gaddafi regime.
Yeah.
So sheer hypocrisy going on, but if you believe that Leveson is about a fair investigation of the press, we think otherwise, and we are predicting that his report will be a draconian crackdown on free reporting in the press and media.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll just remind people that the Skegness Child Snatching Conference, which took place over the last few days, is now appearing on YouTube, so do have a look for it, and you can hear some of the harrowing stories of victims talking about the lies and falsification of documents in order to take their children away. Okay,
are we mentioning later on? Is there something happening?
Indeed, thank you for reminding me. We're also going to put out a special transmission at 6 o'clock tonight. This is going to concern really what is happening in the legal system, what's happening with transparency, and we're also going to be talking about families who are being utterly abused by the system. So if you're curious to know what that's about, please join us at 6 o'clock and you will discover what we've got to say. Thanks very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at 6 and then next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.